Kathleen, as we're coming in here, suggested that if nobody else introduces you, I can.
Sure.
She would have drawn largely from my Match.com bio that he put on there, which is a bunch of lies. We met Match.com 5 years ago, so she's been coming up to High Hampton since she was about kindergarten. You need some more chairs? I guess there's a couple.
One right here next to.
Yeah.
Next to Henry.
So I'm gonna pass on the detailed bio, but thank you anyway, and I'll give you a little history of the talk, but we're gonna tape it primarily for the archives at the Cassius Historical Society that really started the ball rolling on this. So if anybody wants to hear this talk down there, they will. So this is being taped, so this will be on Fox.com tomorrow morning, right? But when we have, I'm try and keep it to 45 minutes, give us about 15 for Q&A, and we'll turn the tape off for that so that you can feel free to say whatever you want. Let's see, where do I start? Got up here, met and got on the board of the Cassius Historical Society, and I told the chairman, I said, what we need around here is a lecture on how this place was populated. And he said, okay, do it. I've been here about a year and a half, and you're never supposed to volunteer for anything. You remember that from the service? And so I did a deep dive on the history of this place, and I think I know a little bit about it. Put together this talk, largely maps and photos and stuff, so it's very dependent on the slideshow. And we did it at Sapphire. The only time it's been given is at Sapphire Inn. We did that as a fundraiser for the Cassius Historical Society. This is not a fundraiser, but if you want to join, you take these home and fill it out. And I think it's $25 or something like that to become a member. But let's see. Well, let's get going on it, because I'm trying to keep it under 45. And I did a rehearsal and had a little trouble with it. The first question I had was,
What is the plateau?
is it really a plateau? So you got to prove it. That looked to me a lot of mountains, So what I did, this is the map of the post office. The shaded area is 3,200 feet elevation. So you see coming up from the south, Whitewater Cove, and you see Sapphire Valley coming up into this 3,200 foot border of what they call the Cassius Highlands Plateau. That's the name they use. And it also, you may have seen this before, they talk about the plateau. Yeah. So really? That doesn't look like a plateau to me. So I did a little research on it, and I found that if you take a look at these major points, they're all above 3,000 feet. And you take a look at the major cities around it, even down to Pickens, is from 1,000 to 2,000. So in reality, this is a higher level in the mountains. That kind of proved it to me. Now, go back in time a little bit. Is 1.2 billion years okay for you? There's a Peloton. Some of you were born back then, I think. There was it's from a geologist, and you'll note where the Rainbow Falls is. This is probably right over this wonderful clump.
Yeah.
And it goes back 1.2 billion years. I don't know how they judge that, but I will tell you that one of the oldest rock formations, about 10 miles long, in the world, way back before, at one point, all of America just about was covered with water, and then the Atlantic came in and out. This rock goes back a long time. The Earth is 4.5 billion years, so this is really an old piece of rock. And after this lecture, we're going to have volunteers go down and dig for it.
Number 13.
Yeah.
Early settlers. Let's talk about it first. First of all, through Siberia, down in here, they say somewhere between 12 and 15,000 years ago. And they came down, and these are the real Native Americans. Now, they weren't called Native Americans. You know what America was back then. But I saw this in the New York Times about 2 years ago. These two guys got in a boat and immigrated illegally into the United States to Alaska. This was only 2 years ago. And look at the names and look at the faces. They were trying to stay out of the Russian army. So I said, that's pretty cool. I'm going to take a look at the faces. And when you look at the faces of Indian chiefs across the country, you see the similarity. This kind of proves to me genetically that, particularly the guy on the left, very similar to the Native American countenance.
Wow.
But what happened when societies move from hunter-gatherer, where they really don't have roots, they don't have farming, to farming, normally along rivers in the Nile, or what happened in America was about 500 AD along the Mississippi, where they started growing corn, they started planting tribes, so that the real first settlers, where they had like a little village, to include the Cherokees, was about 800 AD. And lo and behold, Columbus discovered America, and the next action that I like to report on is the Spanish took a good share of this country badly. This De Soto grew up with about 100 people, with guns, horses, about 3 slaves he had, and he basically massacred a lot of Indians, Native Americans, all the way around. He actually died before they went down to New Orleans. So, but that was a horrible trip that happened by this. And then this guy de Salazar went in his ship up and down the Atlantic coast, and he picked up about 100 Native Americans, took them as slaves to the Barbados and Bermuda. So the Spaniards really kind of occupied the lower part of the country. Now this lists, St. Augustine is famous for being the oldest settlement, but there were other settlements you can see around here that predated that. They just didn't last. The mosquitoes and whatnot just got to them. They couldn't live. The ones up there in north and Georgetown, anybody know where that is? It's just north of Charleston. I can't remember the numbers, but the 3 or 4 slaves left. They went in with the Native Americans, married into the American tribes, and all the white settlers took off and landed down in Florida somewhere. So this one never persisted, although Georgetown predates Charleston. A lot of people, you kind of don't know that. But, so what about Charleston? Well, first of all, this shows 1600, where the tribes were. You don't need to look at all that, but you can see up here the Cherokees. These are villages. They're sprinkled all over the place. And over time, the white men, our ancestors, basically took care of these people, pushed them up into the mountains. I'm going to show you that in detail here in just a second. King of England looks at this map. I was amazed that Santa Fe was that early. It looks like a little spike in the thing. But you see, everything's up in New England or in Florida. King of England says, hey, I'm going to do a power grab on this baby. He's a developer, right? Anybody here a developer? He looks at these 2 latitudes and says, between the 36th and 31st, I'm going to claim it. You have a land claim and you have a land grant. You're going to hear those terms later on because there are grants up here. The first claim that I've been able to recognize was done by this guy, 1629, Charles I. And they didn't know where the Pacific Ocean was, but he said, until you reach it, that's ours. So that's the swath that he cut. About a year after, he had his head cut off. I see somebody going like this. He had his head cut off about a year after this for treason. And his son went to France and kind of, am I talking just going too fast? She's also giving me hand and arm signals. But
Holy smoke.
what happened is his son, 1660, Charles II, was crowned the king. They didn't have a king between that, they call it the interregnum period. He was the king, and the guys that he had helped him. This was his democratic fundraising committee or whatever. These guys, he wants to reward him because now he's king again. They put the crown on, and he basically grants them land in the Carolinas. These are the 8 lord proprietors. And then it wasn't developed for about 10 years or so. Finally, they got this guy, William Sale, who brings about 150 people into Charlestown Landing, and then it moves down to Charleston. And, that's in 16 1680. William Sale was 80 years old when he brought 148 people into Charleston. Anybody here over 80?
Got a few.
And it just so happens that on the ship, I went through a museum for a lot of this stuff. They had slaves. They had one guy they left on Sullivan's Island. The guy whose name was Sullivan. That's how Sullivan's Island got its name. He was to guard the harbor. And they brought in, I was fascinated, they brought in woodworking stuff that was amazing. There were 8 different types of axes for different types of wood, because that's what they needed. They needed wood back in the West Indies. Let's see, anything more in that? That's that. Oh, just a side note. The Cherokees really came together in 1753. They were getting beat up pretty badly. They really came together with a chief. So these individual villages became really a Cherokee nation in 1753. And I think that's a pretty good date to remember. Talked about sales. Let me tell you a little bit about the slave trade. Charleston was really the epicenter of not only bringing slaves in to the country, but also the domestic trading of slaves in the domestic business. And 1808 is when so it started there in 1808 is when the United States said you no longer can bring slaves into the country. I guess they put a tariff on it or something. That's how they did it. But what happened is Charleston continued to be the market for slaves going left and right and everything else. And a couple things about going into this, because I'm going to get at the end of the talk the fact that there are very few blacks up here. I want to talk about that a good bit, and this is all background for that. The Negro Act, 1740, after a big rebellion, made this into law for the colony. Just take a second to read that. And then this continued when North Carolina became a state,
Wow.
South Carolina, till the Civil War. So you think about somebody who doesn't have any money, doesn't have any land, is not in third grade education. It gives you some instinct as to why the blacks go now and just go ahead and occupy some land. There's a bigger history to that, but I thought this was a pretty interesting. This is 1740. And also I discovered that I thought somebody has 5,000 slaves, they have 5,000 slaves. I didn't realize that this was a commodity. People had numbers on it based on your talent. If you knew how to make barrels, which is what a cooper does, you got more money. And if you, and they also, because the slaves were bred massively, and I'll show you some numbers in a minute, you also want to look and say, I'm going to bid 200 pounds for that because it looks like a strong young man, very virile, or a woman, because this is an annuity these guys are buying. It's going to be, they're going to be keep paying off interest. You business folks can get a better sense of that. Okay, I'm going to show you how this, in different census. Census was done every 10 years. I think that was the first census. And what you're going to see here, this yellow line in about 8 charts go pretty fast up across South Carolina. These being trading posts out here. Notice Columbia isn't there, Greenville isn't there. These are the original trading posts. But just watch that line as it goes up. 1750, 1760. You notice the wagon trails start coming down from, a lot of people came here, Scots-Irish in particular, came down from Pennsylvania, Virginia, whatever, North Carolina, through those wagon trails. The rest of it is basically coming in from the lowlands of South Carolina, moving to the west. See, it continues to move. Continues to move. Continues to move, 1790 and 1800. Now, a couple of things. I found it interesting that these towns, Greenville then was called Pleasantburg, Pickens was called Pickensville, Walhalla was called Oconee Station, and Salem was called Sugartown. Those are the origins of those. And I also found it interesting that Walhalla was German immigrants. I think largely came down from the north, not from Charleston. And they named their destination after Valhalla, it was the Greek place where warriors go to die. Being a warrior, I thought I ought to know where Valhalla is. I also know that when we lived in Wiesbaden, Germany, it was with a W. So this was pronounced Valhalla by the Germans, and it was spelled with a W. I just thought that's kind of linguistically of note. Okay, what do we got now? Okay, Indians are getting beat up all across here. It's a love-hate relationship. They not only got a lot of gold, fur, whatnot from the Native Americans, but they traded a lot of stuff. Weapons. Native Americans didn't have weapons before that except bow and arrow. They gave them axes and different things. So there's a lot of trade going on, but they also killed a lot of people. There were a lot of Indian wars. So as they're being pushed back, it's a pretty sad story. But what happens was 3 chiefs got together back when they were getting pushed back, and they went to London. And they were the head of London. They came in all their regalia and everything, and they socialized with all the high aristocracy of London. And their plea was to keep the white settlers away from their land. Makes sense, right? So what's the king do? Historic meeting with King George III. He has a proclamation line. Again, you see that root word claim. I proclaim that. That line, which is basically the line of the Continental Divide of the Appalachian Mountains. We're going to give everything west of that to the Native Americans. Look at the date here. What happened in 1776? George is no longer. So the line doesn't mean squat. What happened was the American government, our government, put out a law. I want to make sure I have the right address on this. First of all, there was a law that Native Americans could not own land, period. North Carolina, South Carolina. The federal government put out a law that's called the Indian Removal Act in 1830, which basically decreed that the Native Americans would be going west.
Oh my God.
And then what happened was, you may probably heard about this, is Trail of Tears, actually 4 routes going back. And you see the blue one up there is where the Cherokees went. And it's estimated that 1/3 of the people went, 1/3 of the people that went did not make it, either for starvation or whatever. I mean, the whole families. Anybody here relocated recently? Anybody here downsized recently? This is a massive relocation downsizing. And the federal government employed the U.S. Army, my army, to help find these people that were out in the woods. Around here, they're actually going out, handcuffs, put them into a POW camp, march them to the west. You talk about deportation now, this was real deportation back in that time period.
Not too different.
No, it really.
Okay, just a quick thing on this.
300 years.
This is a guy who was 1/8 Cherokee, so therefore he was Cherokee. The way the logic then goes, and I think it's still good. He basically took these people west, and he's called the Cherokee Moses. Because not only got them to there, but he developed a constitution for their nation, the Cherokee Nation, and because the Cherokee language is alphabetized recently, he taught them all how to read and write. So the Cherokee Nation went from almost 0 literacy to about 97% literacy
Wow.
in 3 years.
Wow.
So this guy he's a pretty good hero of. And this other guy he used to come through Cassius quite a bit. A white man. I don't think he had any Cherokee blood. I think he might have been an attorney, but don't hold that against him. He was a good man, and the Cherokees loved him. And he went as the chief of the Cherokees, was able to own land because he was a white man, and he developed the Koala Boundary, which was a land trust for the Cherokees that were here, and that didn't have to go out to Oklahoma. And that's where this koala boundary, I couldn't remember the name of that, came from. And that's why you have a Cherokee village here. It's in the koala boundary area. And that's all part of our history too. This chart, I think, says a lot. I was flabbergasted with these numbers, but what it is a
Wow.
100-year picture of what happens to these three races: Native American, white, black. And you see to the top line there, it goes from 10,000 to 300 Native Americans. Now, this is the state of South Carolina, so I don't know if it's North Carolina or whatever, but this is a picture. White goes from 1,400 to 140. Tenfold increase. A lot of those coming ashore and some coming down, but a lot of whites. And look at the number of blacks, 500 up to 500 times increase in that century. That's when really the black population came, to the point that there, as you can see, there are very many more blacks in the state of South Carolina than there were whites. But I was just flabbergasted with that history. And of course, back then, all the women were required to have almost a kid a year. I mean, that was just the game plan, and some babies you lost, but you know, there wasn't any birth control going on. They certainly didn't want any birth control with blacks. So you can see how those populations just kind of grew. I'm trying to stay politically correct here.
Good.
My wife's giving me that evil eye.
It's not his fault, it's history.
Okay. First white settlers. First of all, big caveat. These numbers are a swag. Do you know what a swag stands for?
Scientific wild ass guess.
Scientific or shitty, one of the other, wild ass guess. We don't know numbers here, but I do know that the first settlers were here, and I'll tell you about them, 1825. First seasonal visitor, I believe, was a guy by the name of Wade Hampton, started a hunting lodge.
No way. No way.
Hunting lodge, is that seasonal visitor? And also the first developer out here.
Wow.
All you guys may follow this. And then what happened is this green line, which is year-round residents, has stayed fairly flat. We think it's about 5,000. Nobody has a clue. Why don't they have a clue? There's no geographic line around it. So how could you could go out and find people? But we think it's about 5,000 yearly residents. And this thing starts taking off in the early 1900s. We're going to talk about that later, but now, I think that number would probably be up around 35,000 now. But let's look at the first seasonal visitors. Here's a map, Chattooga River. You can see where Highlands, Caches, and Sapphire. Chattooga River not only is just gorgeous, but it was a good route up. You'll notice the highways and the old Indian trails really kind of followed the rivers up. That's how they went. It's easier than going over mountains, right? So you go. So Chattooga River. Anybody been on the Chattooga River or seen it at all? Gorgeous. In fact, this was Deliverance was filmed there. In fact, I think we might have a couple people in the audience that are. Anyway, Barack Norton, age 52, comes up with a family of about 7 or 8 kids, and he comes up via the Chattooga. Barack Norton, 1826. He sees Whiteside. Everybody's seen Whiteside?
Yeah.
He's climbing up the Chattooga, and he cuts right, goes up Whiteside Cliff, and before he comes in, it catches another hill I gotta climb. It's not gonna get any better than this. So he stops there. His first house was there looking up at Whiteside. And he named the first white person born in the mountains was his daughter. He named her Whiteside. Say a word about these women were tough.
Yeah.
There's a story about Polly Norton, her mother. Well, her gallant husband was up fishing or mining or doing something. He's on a 2 or 3 day trek up in the mountains. She looks outside, there's a bear going after her pigs. And she went out, grabbed an axe, in a nightgown, barefoot, and puts the axe through the bear's eyes. And that's what they had. These were tough people back then. I mean, this is kind of going. But the Nortons were the first family, not the Cashes, but in the Whiteside Cove. The next name nobody's ever heard of, but this guy came up with a family, settled, but he didn't stay for more than a couple of years. He and Norton did have a couple of grants together and land deals and looking for mines, but his family didn't stay, so you don't know the name hardly at all. He actually came from Silva. And then the next guy, Colonel John Alexander Zachary, he's really the founder of Cashers. Now they say he's a colonel. I'm a retired colonel, so I question this. The only record we have, none of the military records show him ever being promoted to colonel, but they did find an envelope down in the Pickens Library, Pickens, that was a letter addressed to him as colonel. So that's why he's a colonel. I think it's kind of like a captain of a ship, you know, that they call him captain. I think it's kind of like that, but I don't know. But I'm kind of sensitive to that. This was quite a guy. His first trip up here came right up the valley here, into Cashers, stopped, liked it, went back, brought his family up a year later, and he's got grants and buildings built all over Cashers. He's really Mr. Cashers. And this guy, Robert Love, in this 7-year period, did a lot of surveying around the area for these boxes of land grants that have become places like this. And what they did, they had 2 guys and 2 horses. They'd stop at a tree and had a chain going out. He'd go down to the next tree with all the market, go back and make notes. And that's how these survey was done that became land grants later through the North Carolina legislature. Now, you don't have to look at all this, but I will tell you that about 90% of those initial grants, you see where Cashers intersection is. So this is down through High Hampton. You know that area pretty well? Okay. Almost 90% of those have got the name Zachary on it.
Yeah.
Here are his kids or something. So he really has the place. And the first house one of his sons built is now at the Cashers Historical Society. It's called the Zachary Talbert House. Talbert is the guy who fixed it up, made it livable, but it's still got all the original, no plumbing, no electricity, that kind of stuff. So, doing this research, I came across this conundrum. Why do they call cashiers Cashers? And I found it fascinating. First of all, you can see that there is a little mini plateau. People erroneously call it a plateau. It's a little flat area between the mountains. You can see it here. But what happened was, Alexander Zachary built his house, a store, and all of the mountain people came down there to exchange gold, gems, for food and axes and all kinds of stuff. It became a country store. The first one here, pre-Ingalls. Pre-Zollers too, you know, you guys use the Zollers?
Zollers, right.
This is pre all that stuff. But they call it, we're going down to the cashiers to cash in our gold for our foodstuffs. Well, later that year, he applied to be postmaster, and he misspelled it. He spelled it Cashers. True story. I found it in the records. And so what happened was, they called it Cashers Valley. The word valley was on there. So I guess that thing is a valley. You're looking up at mountains all around. And then finally, it was still pronounced Cashers. Spelling was corrected in 1875.
Wow.
Still pronounced Cashers. And guess what it is now? Valley's been dropped, but it's called Cashers. It only took me 4 years to learn how to say it. 2 famous guys that came in here. First of all, John C. Calhoun, everybody knows who he was. Vice President of the United States, Senator from South Carolina, the most influential orator on the issue of slavery and secession in the South. And he died before the Civil War, but he was a very, Phi Beta Kappa. Anybody here Phi Beta Kappa? 2 years at Yale, Phi Beta Kappa. He wasn't a dumb guy, just had some kind of weird thoughts. But he was up here visiting in Caches in a place called the
McKinney Lodge.
McKinney Lodge, which was kind of there were two. There were Wade Hampton's Hunting Lodge and McKinney Lodge. This guy is staying in the McKinney Lodge, and there's only one other bunk bed. There's another guy was staying there. Guy came in at midnight, on his horse all sweaty and everything. No room in the inn. He says, baloney. He says, Calhoun, move over, here I come. He jumps in bed with this guy, you know, he's all sweaty and dirty and everything. And I just thought it was kind of funny. Then there's Wade Hampton, and this is about the same age. They probably knew each other, but Calhoun would have known Hampton too better than Wade, the age difference. But they came up here about the same time. And he's really the key name in this whole area, I think. What happens is, 3 pictures of his life. First of all, running a hunting lodge up here, he was recruited to field his troops, and he recruited about 1,000 guys to join in the Wade Hampton militia, and he worked up to 3 stars in the Civil War. Wounded 5 times, so he wasn't one of these guys in the rear, you know, checking his smartphone out or whatever. And wounded 5 times. And then in the Civil War, of course, he lost everything. Probably the richest man in South Carolina, equivalent of a billionaire today, probably. Suddenly, what do you think his net worth was in? Slaves, right? Value of whatever number goes to what overnight? So imagine all of your stocks and bonds and land and all that going to 0 overnight. That's kind of what this guy felt like. But he later became governor during Reconstruction of South Carolina, was very highly thought of by both blacks and whites, because at his funeral, I think he made the statement that I love all my people, black and white. And at the funeral down in Greenville, he was from Columbia, yeah. Gee, that's my teleprompter coming here. I think there were about as many blacks as there were whites honoring him, so he was a very highly thought of guy. Anyway, that's his. He had a hunting lodge. Now these names, land grants, you don't have to look out over here. These are the main names that exist there. You see Bryson, you see them all over the place now. McKinney and Zachary's. Unbelievable. Now take a look at some of the other places closer to you folks. First of all, Georgetown. Anybody know where Georgetown is? It was the name they had for, what is the lake here? Not
Toxaway?
It begins with an F. Fairfield Lake was at one point called Georgetown. And these were the names that were on there. Bryson is a name you see all over the place.
Boy, that's the truth.
Early later, now you look down at Lake Toxaway. This is what I put this in particular for you guys, because this is kind of your neck of the woods. They're the names you see down here. Now, what I found fascinating here is Norton and Zachary. You think are way up in Caches. They're heavily into this whole land grant business down in this neck of the woods. You may recognize some of the other names that I don't know.
Very cool.
Census, 1840. I found this very revealing. First of all, if you look at the different places that kind of clump together, like these 3 are all Caches, and here's Glenville. Hamburg used to be, it was Hamburg, now it's Glenville. Bohaney, you know what that is? You know where Bohaney is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then Toxaway. So you look at the numbers here, and you can see that probably the biggest places back there in 1840 were Toxaway, and I would say the Glenville area, and then Caches. And the other thing I found interesting, to me at least, well, first of all, Caches Valley, look how it's spelled in the census, you see? And then female slaves. The female slaves are not named. This is true throughout a lot of records back in that time frame. And you'll find that the African American community and a lot of historians now refer to enslaved people. And it's not just kind of a nice thing to do, because slaves were not considered to be people for several hundred years. And so calling them enslaved people makes it, I guess, better. I mean, and I try and comply with that, although it's hard to remember all the time. That's why, if you hear this, female slaves, enslaved people, you'll know the reason for it. It's because they didn't consider them to be people back then. Here's a map. You can see the different places where Cassius, look at the spelling still, Sapphire. And the Bohania was called Montvale back then. It went through a couple different names. And what I found interesting was back then some of the roads were developed a little bit differently. For instance, this toll road went to Highlands, I think in about 1930, something like that. This is the road from Bohania. It now no longer exists. It goes across somebody's property, so it's a dirt road. And the trek from Sapphire to Hampton, the Hampton Inn really was over this, between the mountains from Cassius over. And the other one, the main route down to Glenville, was over Sheep Cliff,
About what the road is now.
whatever it is. This is my check, see if you're awake. Okay? Civil War wasn't, this place wasn't touched, although the Zachary family were on both sides of the issue. We had a son who was pro-union, and the father and family were pro-secession. And because of that, there are two graveyards in Cassius, one for the upper and the lower. They're two different Zachary graveyards because of that. But there's no fighting around here. There was a band of raiders called this Colonel. I think everybody liked to be called Colonel back then, but it was Kirkin family. And they came and they basically, they weren't, it was a non-military unit, but they raided a lot of houses and stuff. And there's one story I think is kind of cute. They came into this one house, and the father and mother knew that these guys were going to be coming by, and so they hid all the meat they had in back of the wall boards in the kitchen. So these guys come in knocking on the door and say, "Where's all your meat?" They said, "We don't have any." And a little 5-year-old girl says, "Yes, you did, Daddy." It's right behind the wall. And these guys apparently weren't all bad, although there was one shooting in town that somebody was killed. But these guys asked the father of one family that he would donate for the evening his 3 daughters to go up to a dance with some of his officers. He only had a band of 5 or 6 people, and the guy complied, and the guys acted like officers and gentlemen. They brought the ladies back unharmed. Apparently, that's how the story goes. Civil War. When you look at 1870, that time frame, and you don't need to read all that down. I've tried to collapse it into what did Cassius look like back then. 3 inns, 4 stores, 2 churches, 1 school. So that was really the beginning of the town. And then what happened was the lumber industry came in.
Wow.
Huge. Not only size of trees, but the amount of land that was cleared, mainly by northern people who had the money for it. And I don't know where they got all their labor, but this was a hard job. And they used ox, horses, everything possible to carry these trees down. There were 6 mills in the Hamburg or Glenville area, and there was one big mill up at what is now called Slab Town. Do you know where that is?
Yeah.
Why was it called Slab Town? Big mill, they were making slabs of lumber. So, and the moving this stuff around is very hard work. I was given a book to read up about this, but they used a lot of it coming down to some of these big rivers. And of course, log jams, you blow it up when it gets clogged up and keep them going. And you see the size of the lumber and the guys working out here. And they used railroads. Now, the railroads came up to Toxaway. They didn't come any further. Why? Because it was too steep. Railroads couldn't up it. That's why there aren't any railroads beyond here. They did overtake some tracks and locomotives, and they used it up in the Caches area and around here for hauling lumber. But, okay, that's enough on timber. Let me just see what else. Highlands. Two guys got up on a mountain, Satula Mountain. Everybody know where that is? It's a big mountain overlooking Highlands. One was I got 5 more minutes left.
You're doing fine.
Don't worry.
Keep going.
She gives me a signal. I don't worry. None of this not worry stuff. These guys, one was a cartographer, and they figured that the meeting place of 2 lines, one from Chicago to Savannah and the other New York to New Orleans, would be a wonderful place, and they spotted this place called Highlands. They actually mapped it out. There had been a guy by the name of Hobson years before that had 2 grants there. All of Highlands were in his 2 grants, and he got it for 5 cents an acre. So that's what he bought all of Highlands. Well, these guys really were the developers in Highlands, and it grew and has grown since then. After Caches, this is about 25 years after Caches. So what happened during this period that we all are part of, it ends the country club's developments. And I'm going to go over each of those and show you how they've spread throughout the valley over time. And I'm going to use a map to show you how this happened in just a second. First of all, ends. Edwards Inn, you see at the top there, was actually one of the Norton family actually had the first boarding house there that turned into the old Edwards Inn. So that was kind of interesting to me. And
Really? Wow.
the lodge on top of Hogback Mountain, Sapphire Lodge, 1892. We got into Highland Head. I wanted a couple bits on this. You probably know this history better than I do, but the Fairfield Inn was actually developed by the Toxaway Company. And they built the inn and the lake, and then they actually built Sapphire Lake back in 1897. About 100 years later, there was a big fire there. You may know about that, 1986. It didn't destroy the place, but it revealed safety issues enough that they had to tear it down. Toxaway. Sapphire Lodge. Well, go through High Hampton first. These 2 people got married in 1890. Dr. William Halstead was one of the top doctors in our history. He was responsible for a lot of sterilization of operating rooms, for instance. That was his baby. And this was his head nurse, and she had some problem with her hands, and so between the 2 of them, they had a rubber company make rubber gloves. The first ones were worn by his chief nurse, whom he married. And she is the heir to the Hampton place. And because his parents and maybe grandparents were from Scotland, and his ancestral home was High Halstead, they decided to name it High Hampton.
Oh,
So that's the origin of that. They got married. They lived till 1892. What he did, he liked it a lot. He only acquired through his wife about 400 acres. And then they ended up, he bought about 2,000 more and really created that Hampton area. And in 1922, they both died, I think, within 3 or 4 months of each other, and it was bought by a guy named McKee, who really, took it crazy. Took it
I'm married,
Huh? Was that?
married 9 years old.
Her date of birth's gonna be off.
I didn't hear you.
1832.
Oh, it looks like, it looks as if she were married when she was 9 years old.
Married in 1890, And they both died the same year in 1922.
But she was, she
He
would
also brought in all the dahlias to the, he's Mr. Dahlias. High Hampton Inn, Fairfield Inn, burned down. This Toxaway Lake was the big deal. Luxurious place, would dwarf anything around here now. 500 rooms, 6 trains a day coming up, bringing people up to this resort. This was huge. Unfortunately, the dam burst, the dam burst, and luckily nobody was killed out of it, but that kind of took it to the ground. It never rebuilt. And these guys came in, show you who they are. These were called the Four Vagabonds, and they made a number of trips every summer out trying to get America out into the countryside, out at sea, and they were very highly covered in the press. So the real point of getting America to look at this place really came from these guys' trips out here. And I don't know what lake that was, because 2 years before that was the dam burst, so it must be another lake. But anyway.
Wow.
And of course, you know, Ken Marywood came in at the same time period. I have a theory about this. The camps where you send kids to be out in the open, outdoors, fishing, horseback riding, fire pits at night kind of thing. I think we older people got to see it and said, that's not too shabby, I think I'll take you up on that. And I think a lot of the seasonal growth from here comes from that original experience. This was the epicenter of camps for the eastern part of the United States, right here in
Very cool.
country clubs. I'm going to go through this pretty fast. What you'll see is this map. I'm going to fill up over time. At the end of about 8 quick charts, you'll see blotches all over the place. This is country clubs. 1922, High Hampton. 1928, Highlands. 1956, Sapphire Club of Sapphire. 61, Wildcat Cliffs. 1973, Burlingame. I won't bore you with the history of all that, but I gather these 2 investors, one kind of took the Toxaway area and the other came down south. Is that pretty much true?
Yeah.
In terms of how many years ago? Burlingame, one of the early country clubs up here. Here are the others. Highland Falls, Sapphire National, Wade Hampton Club, Colassaga Club. I didn't see that right there. Colassaga.
That's correct. Yeah.
I need to hear that from her. Cedar Creek, Trillium, Headwaters, Old Edwards, Mountaintop, Chickapin, Bear Lake Reserve. Anybody know where that is? Never really took off. So clubs on the plateau, that's how they came to be. Of course, in all of these groups. Now, the next thing I'll show you is the developments, which comes first, kind of a chicken and the egg thing. You have a development, then put a club in, put a club in, then have a development. Some of you real estate people can clarify that for me. This again, I'm showing the map. I'm going to put these on one at a time. 55, Lancewood. 58, Ganasita. 67, Holly Forest. 79, Sheep Laurel. 81, Cedar Creek. 84, Big Sheep Cliff. 85, Cedar Hill. 88, Chattooga. Trillium, 97. Mountaintop, 04. Lonesome Valley, 06. High Hampton, 23. High Hampton really has grown from 1922 all the way, so the most recent major growth happened just a couple of years ago, and it's still happening in the High Hampton area. It's got the date high 23. Croquet. Started at the Chattooga Club in 1991 by Kathleen.
There you go.
Well, one of the people.
With a little help from a friend.
You were just a child back then.
I was. I was only 9.
Because, I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick now, but because my background is sociology, when I went for my degree, I didn't know how to spell sociology, but I want to try and give you a view of who are the people that are living up here using demographic and socioeconomic data. All pretty guesswork, because I can't vouch for any of these numbers. But the first thing is age. This shows how the population is. This is an old community, in case you didn't notice it, look around. How about in terms of education? I am guessing that most of the seasonal people up here, either one or the other has 1 or 2 degrees, maybe 3. Heavily educated, seasonal people. My guess is all year there are some PhDs and doctors out there, but the vast majority of the year-round people are low in education. It's just a fact. In fact, 33% below the federal literacy guidelines. I read in one book. By race, this is my guess. Don't have any numbers to support it, but highly white, Hispanic came up. Of course, you know they're working all over the place, so you see them all over the place. They don't live here, but they're up here. In 1998 or 1980, Reagan had an amnesty program that brought a lot of Mexicans up into the major cities, Atlanta, Charleston, whatnot. This was back in the 1980s. Then some of them come up here to the mountains, maybe 100, a couple hundred, not very many. And then now they've continued to continue working up here. My guess is about 2,000. Don't live here, they live in Sullivan, Franklin, and other places, but that's that one. The black population is minimal for a lot of complex reasons, but one of the main reasons is the first settlers up here weren't plantation owners, they were households and farmers. And they maybe had one slave who was then freed, became a freed man, a freed woman, but they wouldn't buy it here, they didn't have any money. So the few blacks who were up here back in 1865 didn't stay. And since then, there have been a lot of things that probably limit the number of blacks coming here, most of which is money. And there's also, I think you have to admit, there's also a certain prejudice that we have that kind of tends to keep those folks away, and you say, well, they just don't want to be here. Those are two sides of the same coin. You don't want to be here if you don't like it, you know? So, but I think the reality is there are very few blacks on the mountain. I haven't been able to find very many. Wealth. Vast majority of these 30,000 people are quite wealthy. I make the statement that if you're going to buy a seasonal home for about $2 million, you got a good chunk of change because you got another house somewhere else. So you don't have somebody that's got two, you know, trying to rub nickels together. That's kind of my thought on it. Middle income, poverty level. And the all-year residents down below there, you see 25% are below the federal poverty guidelines. You don't see them downtown. You don't see them here, but they're out there. Wow. Median sales prices. This is what's done to the housing market. Back in 15, about $500,000. You see what it is now. Probably pretty close to 1.3, 1.2, 1.3 million. In summary, that's what she's waiting for, right? It really is a magical place. You look at it right here, the view, the scenery, except when it's raining, great people. And just to conclude, wrap up the talk, and we can have some questions.
That's beautiful.
That's why I think people came to this place. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you.